After many weeks of journeying to this point, the band found themselves high in the mountains of Isocross. This should be the spot where we find our answers. I hope so. I don't want to have fought all those Yetis for nothing. I don't know, it was kind of fun, but this place seems pretty desolate. As soon as this was said, a rumble came from deep within the mountain. Intruders, why do you come here? Ah, hello there. We are seeking knowledge from the mighty Tearing. And with that, the ground shook. Snow exploded into the air, and a huge Yeti burst forth from the ground. The Yeti bent down into Moldus' face. Why would you seek knowledge from I? Yeti, form up! Hordliang. Please, mighty Tearing, we seek an artifact to help us defend our people from a great evil. Evil? Good and evil are constructs. It all depends on the point of view of the raconteur. Why should I help you locate this object? Please, you're right, but our enemy will kill many innocent people. We'll do all we can to stop them. All? What would you give that is so valuable? Our lives, if we need to. Is your life worth so little that you would throw it away? We don't want to die, but to save our families, our friends, those who would not survive, I give mine happily. Hello everyone, so this is kind of very different to what I've been doing on my channel. I love painting and I love making dioramas. I'm not going to say I'm the best, but I kind of enjoyed, but I love doing it, and so I just wanted to start filming it and recording it. Yeah, so much fun to do. Hopefully you enjoyed that intro. I was just playing around and I just wanted to share a little story, and I just wanted to do some Thunderbirds-esque kind of filming. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that. It was fun to make. And yeah, so in this video I'm just going to show how I painted this miniature. It's a Yeti from Atlantis Miniatures. I bought it. I didn't get sponsored to do it, but I love their minis. They are beautifully produced minis. They just cut really well sculpted, really a pleasure to paint. This one was so much fun. Like I said, the details on it are just gorgeous. And really, I think I'm due to get one of... I kickstarted one of their other projects like about a year and a half ago, and I think that they're delivering fairly soon, so you could end up seeing more. But yeah, just really great miniature, and this is basically how I painted it. Okay, so off screen I actually did base coat. I painted the Yeti a kind of dark grey, and then I used white ink in order to do a zenithal highlight, so that was from above just to make the lighter areas lighter, basically, as if it was being hit by the sun. And then I actually used I used Nighthawk Gloom for the skin tones. I used it with an airbrush as a kind of ink, and so it wasn't too thick that it didn't cover up those highlights, so I used that as my base skin tone. I then just went over again the fur with a very light airbrush of light grey, just to sort of bring those highlights back out. And after that I went back in with the Nighthawk Gloom, and I went in between the clumps of hair. So what I wanted to do is I really wanted to separate each of the clumps of hair from each other. So I used quite a thin layer right in the creases, right in the crevices between the clumps of hair, and I pretty much separated like every single clump of hair. If there was a larger clump of hair, I also put a little bit of this down the middle of it, and I used it direct from the pot, but I used thin layers, and so I just built it up gradually. So where it was, where the model was more in shadows, I built it up heavier and a little bit thicker. The lowlights were a little bit wider, and on top I kept them fairly thin to really sort of try and have a difference between where the sun was hitting and where it was in shadow. I then went in again with that Nighthawk Gloom and just went over the skin, where when I sort of used the ink to highlight the skin again a little bit, where it sort of made it a little bit lighter. So I just went back in and sort of made that separation between the fur and the skin tone, just to make them pop and stand out from each other. And again, I kept on sort of building up shadows where it made sense. I then actually went in with Dragonhof Nightshade. This was very much watered down, and used this to do the deeper lowlights, the deeper crevices, the deeper shadows, and also underneath the muscle. And a little bit over the areas where like there was lots of wrinkles on the skin or whatever. I also mixed this with Druchii Violet, so I made a slightly purpley sort of low light wash, and this I just used very much in the underneath, in the real shadows. And then I also used the Dragonhof Nightshade to just sort of draw a line between the snow and the back of the Yeti and the fur, just to sort of make them stand out from each other. Once I'd done all the lowlights, I used Ulthern Grey to basically bring the fur lighter, to make the fur lighter. I didn't want it to be a pure white, and Ulthern Grey was the perfect combination. It worked really nicely with all the other paints, just sort of the tone was right. So I used it on my wet palette, so this was very much thinned down, and I just brought those highlights up bit by bit, and I went round the sort of, if there was, I tried to avoid where I put the lowlights, the wash or the Nighthaunt Gloom, and just brought it up until it made sense. So obviously on the top where the sun would be hitting, there was a lot more, the highlights were a lot wider and thicker and heavier, but where it was on the shadows, it was a lot lower, it was a lot lighter touch, maybe just one layer compared to sort of 3 or 4 layers, just to really sort of have difference, like I say, depending on how the sun would make it look. And so I just kept on building it up till I was happy with how it looked, basically. And I think it came out pretty well in the end. I surprised myself. Once I'd done this, I wanted to really sort of push the lowlights on the skin tone. So I used Dark Reaper, really sort of watered down, and then I used this in the deeper shadows of the muscles on the skin, and then I mixed it with Rust Grey and Ulthern Grey as I got to the sort of the highlight areas, just so that I really had a difference in skin tone. So like I said, the lowest shadows were the Dark Reaper alone, and by the time I got to the top there was a lot more of the Rust Grey and maybe the Ulthern Grey for the highlights, and I stippled it. So again, it was watered down and I stippled it, so it didn't cover up the base coat, it didn't completely cover it up, so you still had those shadows from there and you could still see them, but it was enough to be able to it just accentuated what we'd already done with all the base work underneath. And of course, by the time you got to edge highlighting on the face details, maybe on the hands, this was a fairly light Ulthern Grey with a little bit of Rust Grey, again very much watered down, and I just tried to again stipple and really hit the highlights and just go over them and build it up until it looked right. And on the wrinkles on the hand, you had all these beautiful wrinkle details on the hand, so I'd go in with, again, very thin down mix, and just sort of hit them with a light touch. If it was too much, if it didn't look right, I'd just wipe it off with my finger because it was quite wet, so I was able to do that. And I just built it up so that we had these highlights and so you could really see the wrinkles. And again, I was really happy with how it came out. I just think I thought it looked kind of cool by the time I'd done it, so yeah, I was happy with that. Then I worked on the snow, so I used sort of turquoisey colour. I mixed it in with Blue Horror and Pallid Witch Flesh and made a real pale sort of turquoise colour, and I painted this on the snow, so the snow was on the back of the Yeti, on the base, and the snowball in the Yeti's hand, and I just painted this on. This was just like the base coat for the snow. But it was a beautiful colour. It was a real beautiful kind of pale blue. It was just really pretty. I really liked it. But what I did also do is I watered it down even further and used it as a kind of glaze, and used it on the prominent hairs on the top. I used it in the middle of the hairs just to give like a little bit of a turquoise low light and give them a slightly colder colour. So I just used it as a low light in the upper skin. I didn't film any of this very well, so the eyes, the teeth, I didn't paint this well at all, but I gave a base coat to the eyes and I gave a base coat to the teeth with just a white paint. I realised I use a lot of Citadel. I don't just have Citadel, but for this I seem to use a lot of it. I also use this just to give some edge highlight where I needed it on the top of the thing. I then put some Caribou Crimson in the nose, in the mouth, in the eyes, and then I went in with a bit of a line of red for the eyes, and then put a little dab of Pallid Witch flesh in the centre. For the teeth I did Screaming Skull base and then Pallid Witch flesh, and then highlighted it with a little bit of pure white, and I kind of wet blended it and mixed it with a bit of Agrat Ursaid so that it was a bit more of a slow gradient. It was very much a wet blend for the nails, so I used Eshin Grey in the deepest recesses, and then Storm Vermin Fur, and then Ulthern Grey at the lightest edge. And like I say, I just completely wet blended this, and then I went in with the Ulthern Grey afterwards to do sort of light highlighting. I wanted the highlighting to sort of go back into the nail. I didn't want it to be just on the very edge to make it look like there's sort of cracks in the nail and stuff like that. Again, I was really happy with how it came out. Once I'd done that, I just painted the rocks. So there was rocks in the snowball, in the rocks on the head, on the back rather, and on the base. So, you know, Mechanicus Standard Grey, and then I actually just dry brushed with Dawnstone, with Administratum Grey, and with Screaming Skull. I wasn't too worried. With the rocks, again, there was enough detail that the dry brush could really pick out the difference, so I didn't need to really go in and do anything more complicated than a dry brush for this. It worked really well. So I just built those lighter layers up with a thinner and thinner dry brush, and again, you know, I mean, rocks fairly straightforward relatively, I'd say, and again I was quite pleased with how it came out in the finished product. It really had the differentiation, and using the Screaming Skull just sort of gives the rocks a slightly browner tint. Then I actually did the snow. I went back into the snow and I used some sponge with tweezers, and I used a lot of Blue Horror and then Pallid Witch flesh and then white, and I stippled on these colours. I just stippled it up. I just built it up in layers, and because I was using like a sponge and stippling, it just it wasn't a solid block of area, and so it gave the snow, which relatively was sort of lower feature, it just gave the snow a lot more depth. So I just built it up with these 3 different colours and just built it up like I say with stippling, and again I thought it gave it a lot of depth, and I love the turquoise base coat. I then used some thin down PVA. I put that on the snow areas, so not on all the snow areas, but some of the snow areas. So on the base, on the snowball, on the back and then I just sort of pressed it or sprinkled on some basing snow. So this just gave it a bit more of a 3D effect. I didn't completely cover up all the painting work I'd done, and again I was quite pleased with how it ended up. There were certain areas I put like little bits on the shoulders and stuff like that, and there I just I put a little bit of glue and then just sprinkled it on, and I was really pleased because I had it sort of bursting out of snow, so I was quite pleased with the way it came out. And then I used it to fill in the gaps between the base and the feet and the hand when I glued the actual mini together. So yeah, that was pretty much it, and some finished pictures afterwards, I think, after I ramble. Alrighty, so I'm gonna leave you. I've got a diorama that I've almost finished, so hopefully that one will be out in the not too long, but don't expect these like every week. It's going to be way more spaced out than that. But hopefully you enjoyed that video, and if you've got any questions, do let me know. If you liked it, please like, share, subscribe, that kind of thing. And yeah, like I say, I will be doing more of these videos. And it was just really good fun. And with that, I'm going to leave you with some still images of the Yeti. Thanks for watching. Oh. That didn't work.